When a simple-looking woman walked into the courtroom, even the judge couldn't hide his smirk. What happened next stunned everyone. This is the shocking story of how appearances can deceive, and how a courtroom was turned upside down by one hidden genius. The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation as the doors opened, and a woman stepped in quietly. She looked out of place, modest dress, no makeup, carrying a small worn-out handbag instead of a briefcase. Her hair was tied back simply, and her shoes looked like they had walked many miles. As she made her way to the defendant's table, murmurs started spreading across the room. "Is she representing herself?" someone whispered. The opposing attorney leaned back in his chair with a smug smile, whispering something to his assistant that made them both chuckle. The bailiff rolled his eyes slightly, already predicting how this case would go. The judge, an older man with sharp features and a tired gaze, peered over his glasses and let out a sigh. He tapped his pen impatiently before addressing her. "Miss, are you certain you don't want legal representation? This court doesn't take kindly to amateurs wasting time." The woman stood still for a moment, then gave a polite nod. "I'll represent myself, Your Honor." Her voice was calm but quiet. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed, and scribbled something in his notes. The courtroom, still murmuring, settled into silence as the trial was about to begin. The judge leaned back in his chair, adjusting his robe as he glanced at the woman before him. "This should be quick," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for some to hear. A few quiet laughs echoed from the gallery. The prosecutor stood confidently, buttoned his coat, and walked to the front with ease. His tone was firm, rehearsed. He laid out the charges and evidence like a man who had already won. When he finished, he looked over at the woman with a half smile, then returned to his seat. The judge turned to her, nodding slightly. "Your opening, miss," he said, the tone more command than courtesy. She stood up slowly, clutching a stack of papers that shook slightly in her hand. As she reached the podium, a few sheets slipped from her grasp and scattered on the floor. A low wave of laughter spread through the courtroom. She bent down, calmly gathering the papers, not reacting to the mockery around her. "My apologies," she said gently. Her voice barely rose above the silence. "Proceed," the judge snapped. "We don't have all day." She nodded and began speaking, her tone still unsure. She mispronounced a legal term, paused awkwardly, and glanced at her notes. More murmurs followed. The judge looked irritated, scribbling something again. "Please, stay focused," he said sharply. "This isn't a classroom." She stopped, looked up at him, and for a brief second, a strange calm settled in her eyes. There was something behind her polite demeanor, something calculated. She bowed her head slightly and said, "Of course, Your Honor." Then she turned another page in her file, and for those paying close attention, her hands had stopped trembling. The show had just begun, though no one realized it yet. When it came time for cross-examination, the woman rose again, this time with a steadier posture. Her voice was firmer, her steps more confident. She approached the witness stand and looked the first witness in the eye. "You stated you saw the incident at 9:45 p.m., she said clearly. The witness nodded. "But in your written statement, you said 10:15 p.m. Which one is it?" The witness blinked, unsure how to respond. A murmur passed through the gallery. She didn't wait. "You also claimed the streetlight was out, but this photo, taken the next morning, shows no damage. Did you perhaps assume it was off because you didn't see clearly?" The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The witness stammered. She moved on to the next one, calmly and methodically poking holes in every version of events they had given. Details that had gone unquestioned were now under a spotlight. People in the gallery sat up straighter, whispering less, watching more. The courtroom energy shifted, mockery replaced by curiosity. Even the judge seemed taken aback. He leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "That was a good point," he said reluctantly after one of her exchanges. She nodded respectfully, saying nothing more than, "Thank you, Your Honor." Her once timid voice now echoed with clarity and purpose. The prosecutor shuffled through his notes, suddenly unsure. No one laughed now. The quiet woman had become something else entirely, someone who saw everything, remembered everything, and made no mistakes. And for the first time, people were starting to notice. She returned to the center of the courtroom, this time with no trace of hesitation. Her voice carried more weight now, measured, confident, clear. She spoke with the poise of someone who had done this 1,000 times. At one point, the prosecutor used a legal term incorrectly, and without a hint of arrogance, she corrected him. "Actually, that would fall under constructive intent, not implied malice," she said, her tone calm and factual. The room grew quiet again. She didn't look at her notes. There were none. Instead, she recalled case law from memory, citing rulings with precision. In Mitchell v. Thompson, 1994, the court held that circumstantial evidence alone could not outweigh contradictory forensic reports. That principle applies here. The judge blinked, clearly surprised. The prosecutor stood, objecting quickly, claiming her reference was irrelevant. She turned to him without missing a beat. "The objection fails, Your Honor. The prosecution introduced circumstantial evidence in place of expert testimony. I'm simply applying the precedent." The judge hesitated, then nodded. Objection overruled. There was no applause, no gasps, just silence. A heavy, tense kind of silence. Even the gallery, previously dismissive, now watched her with narrowed eyes, trying to figure out who she really was. She moved with complete control, dismantling the arguments laid before her like pieces of a fragile puzzle. The prosecutor, once smug, now sat rigid and pale, flipping through his files with increasing urgency. The judge leaned forward, no longer dismissive, but fully attentive. Something had shifted. The courtroom was no longer laughing. Now it was listening. The judge, visibly unsettled, leaned forward, peering at her with growing suspicion. He tapped his pen against the bench, watching her like one might watch a magician who'd performed a trick too perfectly. "Where did you study law?" he asked, his voice sharp, almost accusing. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Then she straightened her posture and spoke with unwavering calm. "Harvard Law School, Your Honor. Class of 2012. Graduated at the top of my class." The courtroom erupted in gasps. The same people who had laughed at her just an hour ago now sat frozen, mouths slightly open, stunned into disbelief. The prosecutor's pen slipped from his hand. The bailiff looked over in shock. The judge blinked several times, as if trying to process what he'd just heard. Before anyone could speak again, she continued, "I came into this courtroom without a suit, without a title, and without an introduction to expose the bias that operates silently in this space. The presumption that I was unqualified, incapable, or uneducated was made before I ever spoke a word. I wanted to experience that judgment, not as a lawyer, but as a woman seen as less." Her voice remained calm, but it carried undeniable force. She turned back to the evidence and seamlessly resumed her argument, her logic airtight, her delivery flawless. Each point landed like a final nail in a carefully built case. No more laughter, no more doubt. Even the judge, a man used to power and control, found himself silent, reduced to an observer in a courtroom that no longer belonged to him. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their expressions unreadable. The foreperson stood, holding the slip of paper that held the fate of the accused. The clerk took it, unfolded it slowly, and read aloud, We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. A beat of silence, then murmurs of disbelief and admiration filled the room. The woman stood still, her hands folded, her expression composed but not smug. The judge looked at her for a long moment, the arrogance once etched into his features now softened by humility. He removed his glasses and spoke quietly, but with weight. Miss, or rather, counselor, what you did in this courtroom today was extraordinary. I underestimated you. We all did. She simply nodded, offering no triumph, only gratitude. The prosecutor approached her slowly, the confidence drained from his usual swagger, replaced by something real. He extended his hand. Well played, he said, his voice sincere. She took it, firm and respectful. The gallery, filled with those who had once chuckled and whispered, began to clap, first a few, then many. Not loud or theatrical, but steady and meaningful. She turned to leave, her posture relaxed, her presence once again unassuming. No grand exit, no dramatic speech, just the same quiet woman who had walked in. But now the entire courtroom knew better. She had spoken with brilliance, challenged bias, and defended justice, not with noise, but with undeniable truth. And that was more powerful than anything they had expected. We live in a world quick to judge where appearance often speaks louder than truth, until the truth speaks for itself. In that courtroom, a woman walked in underestimated, dismissed, even mocked. But behind the simple clothes and quiet voice was a brilliant mind, a trained expert who had no need to boast. She didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard. What she revealed wasn't just her own capability, but the hidden assumptions we all carry, the biases that cloud our judgment before a single word is spoken. Intelligence doesn't always wear a suit. Justice doesn't always shout. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the loudest truth. That day, in that courtroom, everyone learned that lesson the hard way. If stories like this inspire you, remind you not to judge too quickly, or make you see things differently, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful true stories.